Hi, my name is Tammy,
And I'm Jen.
and they call us Woo.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we are talking about a topic that is a little bit near and dear to my heart, just because I've had a lot of experiences in my life with this particular subject. And I've had a lot of, I'll say, arguments with people about it over the years, too. Not like super intense arguments, but talking about twin flames and
Mm-hmm.
soulmates and people get a little bit sensitive about this topic sometimes because
Yeah.
everybody wants to believe that they are with their soulmate or they've found their twin flame. They don't know the difference between the two things, and they have a lot of assumptions about what it means.
Mm-hmm.
So, that is what we're going to be talking
Understandably,
about.
right? It's getting to the
Yeah.
heart of your relationship. Everyone wants to believe their relationship is like destined,
Yeah.
and I love this. This was something that one of our listeners brought up. So thank you for giving us input about that she wanted us to talk a little more about twin flames. And I was excited to do that because I agree. It is interesting. I mean, honestly, I feel like with some of these subjects, like there might be a lot of different information out there.
Yes.
Whether or not you believe it's one thing or the other, it usually just comes down to what seems to make the most sense. But sometimes I find that the interpretation that people accept is the one that matches the most closely with what they already want it to be.
True. True.
So we'll see. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you believe the difference is between soulmates and twin flames?
Sure. So, I actually went because I know what I believe. And so this morning I was like, I'm going to go do a whole bunch of research this morning. I've been doing a little bit of research over the last few days, but this morning I was like, I'm going to go through and I'm going to read all of the definitions and read all of the things. And I was like, oh, that's way different from that one. And that's way different from that one. And
Yeah.
oh, that person's a little snippy about this. And so my understanding, I'm not going to go into what their understanding was because my understanding is that your soulmate you have many soulmates, and your twin flame is a soulmate, but your soulmates aren't necessarily your twin flame. So you have a soul group that you travel with. Your soul in every incarnation has people, souls who have contracted with you to assist you in moving forward and choosing a more healthy path for yourself.
Mhm.
So your soulmates are like your friend group forever. Your
Right,
twin
which is a good
flame,
point because soulmates don't necessarily need to be romantic partnerships. That's
no.
my understanding too. A soulmate can be anyone that you have that connection with that is somebody who is supposed to be in your life for one reason or the other.
Yes. But here's where I get into arguments with people because I don't believe that twin flames are necessarily your romantic partner either.
Correct. That's my understanding
So
too.
we're on the same page. No
Yes.
arguments here, you
Again,
guys.
this is just what we believe, but
Yeah. But so twin flames are actually a mirror to your own soul. So it
Mhm.
is it's not really another soul. It's a piece of you. It's a piece
Right.
of your higher self who is like mirroring your beliefs and mirroring your fears and mirroring everything that you need to work on so that when you two come together, you can call each other out on your
Mhm.
junk. I was gonna cuss. I didn't cuss. I said junk. Censored myself. You guys are welcome. Um, so they mirror your junk back to you so that you can learn and grow on a faster trajectory. And so a lot of the time, people who are like, twin flame, I want to be in this relationship with
Your
them.
audio kind of like uh went out a little bit. All right, try that
Oh,
last little
is it
piece
better?
again. Oh, my twin flame. I think it was just like your voice is high and I can't recognize what's
Probably
happening.
my microphone's like, what are you doing, ladies? Stop it. So it's like, oh my gosh, I want to be in this relationship with my twin flame. It's gonna be so awesome and it's gonna be the best thing in the whole entire world, and we're gonna be like all over each other and lovey-dovey and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes and no, because think about the people that you love most and the ones who call you out on your junk. Like you love them so much, but when they start calling you out on your stuff, you're like, I do not like you very much right now. I love
Yeah.
you dearly, but I want to slap you silly. Like, not really.
Mm-hmm.
But like those are the people that trigger you the most. And it's the same thing with a twin flame, in my opinion, because they know the most about you because they're your mirror. So a lot of the time they're going through the same things. So when people are super excited to be in relationship with them, well, they're going to have this super, super deep connection. And a lot of the time they can communicate with each other without actually talking. And they know all these things and they just feel this really deep connection. They also know how to push our buttons most so that we get triggered and can learn and grow.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my understanding. What's your understanding, Tammy?
So a lot of my understanding is very similar, that soulmates are different than twin flames. And again, I feel like a lot of people had the understanding like my twin flame is like my partner for life or whatever. But things I've read about it that seem to make the most sense to me. And I'm coming from a place where I truly believe that my spouse is my twin flame. And it's not because like, oh, I just want him to be my romantic partner or whatever. It's because of what we've done for each other in our lives. So some of the stuff I read that made the most sense to me was the basic idea that, like you said, the twin flame was like a piece of the same soul that are kind of destined to keep coming back and finding each other in different iterations of your life or different lives. And it's not always because it's going to be romantic. Like a lot of times it's something that you might feel like that immediate connection with the person. And let me be clear, I am not a fan of like rom-com, like crazy BS love stories where like some dude like stalks you and that means love. But
Yeah.
I do believe that there's people in your life that you have an immediate connection with, like you and I.
Yeah.
When we
Yep.
met, it was like we had known each other forever, which we later found was true, which you
Yes.
probably already knew, but I found out later.
Yes.
But they also don't tend to necessarily have like a perfect ideal relationship. And
Mhm.
let me be clear, I am not talking about like finding an abusive partnership and going like, oh, this person is like triggering me and I should stay with them because they're my twin flame. No.
No.
What happened with us is we got in a relationship when I was fairly young. I was 19. And we were in this relationship for about a year. We cared about each other deeply. We had a very quick connection. And it wasn't like a superficial, like, you know, I just want to sleep with you connection. Not saying I wasn't attracted to him, but it was more than that.
Yeah.
It was like our conversation flowed really easily. We really enjoyed talking to each other. For a person who hates to be on the phone, he talked to me a lot on the phone.
Yeah.
And we looked forward to that. We looked forward to talking to each other. But he was at a really difficult place in his life. I was young. Didn't matter how much we cared about each other. It wasn't going to work because there was things that he was going through that I didn't know what to do with that. And he didn't know, he wasn't ready to understand or address it yet. So we ended up separating after a year and lost track of each other for a number of years. And then just kind of like almost in a sappy rom-com type of way ended up reconnecting.
Yeah.
I'll tell that whole story another day. But when we reconnected, it was like looking back, it had to happen the way it happened in order to reach this next level for both of us. I needed to learn some stuff in the interim. He needed to learn some stuff in the interim. And part of his story is he's had trauma his whole entire life. He's had a lot of abuse his whole entire life. And me being there at one point and then being gone and then popping up again later, I remember one of the things he said to me was like, you're still the same. And I'm like, am I supposed to be different? And he's like, but you're so nice. And he's like, and I was like, yeah, I mean, thanks, but that's who I am, you know? And it was like he had to have all these experiences to understand, like, this person is not trying to get something from me. They just care about me in order for him to be able to engage with that further. Well, then that care later led to him, like, he's a different person now than he was, when I was 19, and a different person he was than when we, reconnected later on. He's gone through a lot of therapy, a lot of his own journey, a lot of understanding about himself. But it was not always easy. I very much was like a catalyst for very uncomfortable things sometimes. And
Yeah.
interestingly enough, like his therapist even said that before, because I didn't know if I was doing the right thing. But when he was triggered into these PTSD trauma experiences, it was like he was totally disconnected. So he would keep repeating these things that I didn't know this was the right thing to do, but I would basically just stand up and be like, that's not what's happening. That's not what's happening. I promise that's not what's happening. We have to figure out what's happening. But I'm saying this in a way that sounds like really mild. Those were not mild moments. Those were really,
No.
really intense moments. I don't know if anyone listening has ever experienced these like PTSD trauma experiences, or know somebody, but like it's so hard. They're not in their bodies at the moment. They are in a whole different place and re-experiencing this terrible thing in their bodies, and it's very hard to pull them out of it. Well, as I found out later, that was actually a good thing that I wasn't like just backing away in his particular case. It was good for me to not let him engage with this idea that these things were really happening that weren't, and try to help him, like bring him down to earth. So I've been a very grounding force for him, but also like my little badger part of me was fierce enough to be like, I know this isn't right. I'm not backing down. I don't care if this sucks right now, because I always saw this like beautiful, like he's such a beautiful soul. He really is. He's just like super caring and loving. It's like this goofy, funny, like engaging, really like innocent person inside of all of these barriers. So I would see that and be like, no, this is you. Like, this other stuff is not you. I know who you are. Like, you need to find out who you are,
Yeah.
And these experiences were hard. They were hard. There was moments where I wasn't sure if we were going to make it, because I didn't know if this was something that he was going to be able to figure out. And in the meantime, all of these things were being mirrored back to me, right? Like understanding where my boundaries were, understanding how not to feel other people's feelings to the point where I was losing myself. Like all of these experiences were also being mirrored back to me, trying to figure out how to have the right boundaries and how to care about someone, but also not lose myself. So we were both having these dual experiences that very much needed to happen. But we can honestly both say that we have helped each other learn things that we needed to learn to continue to grow and to continue to be better people in this human experience. So we have a very deep love and connection that will never change. I mean, even if for some crazy reason we were to be separated at some point again in the future, that would never change. I always had that connection. I even remember after the first time we dated, I don't know. I'm the type of person where I really do like love and care about the people I'm with, but once I break up, I don't necessarily want to be friends with them because it's weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
So of all of the people I ever dated, he was the only one that would like pop up in my mind sometimes, and I genuinely wanted to know if he was okay. Yeah. And I'm sorry if anyone else I've dated is listening. It doesn't mean I didn't care about you.
Really we know how you feel, Tammy.
But that being said, there was something there. He just kept, and then I found out later that was the same thing for him. I would pop up into his head and he would wonder how I was and what I was doing. Also not the same as other relationships that he has had. So that is why I believe that he is my twin flame, because it wasn't just all lovey-dovey hard eyes. Do we have those moments? Absolutely. But it was hard sometimes. And it was hard because, like you said, they were mirroring these things that we both needed to see in order to be able to level up, to take care of ourselves better, these things that we really needed to do in our lives. And again, I'm not saying like people need to look at this from a sense of like, this isn't a romantic movie. This is humans having a human experience. This doesn't
Mhm.
mean that if someone is being just downright abusive to you, you should be like, oh, well, they're probably helping me learn something. Well, you should walk away and learn something from it after you've
Yeah.
walked away.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the reality is like, take care of yourself. If you're recognizing that these things are happening and this twin flame is in your life and is helping you to grow and be better, then that ultimately is a good relationship. And for us, there was so much love and respect at the core of all of it. There's lines that we never crossed, and there's things that we, when it was hard, that we always came back to try to help ourselves get better. You know, therapy,
Yeah.
other things that we did. I apologize if you hear some noises in the background. My cat loves garbage, and he is currently chasing a lid he found somewhere all over the floor. So, anyway,
Well, so
long story short, that's my
yeah.
experience.
Well, and I think it's a really important thing to talk about how it's so a lot of people think that they're supposed to end up with their twin flame, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not necessarily the case. There are a lot of instances where your twin flame is the person who triggers you the most, and oftentimes those relationships can be very abusive because people haven't dealt with their junk. You talked a lot about you guys have gone through therapy, you guys have gone through these things, you guys have done your work, and that is what's ultimately supposed to happen
Mm-hmm.
in this relationship is that once people have done their work, they can come back to that space of loving connection.
Right.
But until you've done your own work, you're going to keep triggering the crap out of each other.
Right.
And sometimes, based on the trauma that you've been through, that can be super volatile.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've known a few people who have found their twin flame, and it is very obvious that they've found their twin flame by their interactions. Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody can see it, but neither of them were willing to work on the stuff that they needed to work on. And
Right.
so every time they were in the space with each other, they would mirror back to each other everything they needed to work on in the most intense way
Mm-hmm.
possible. It was so uncomfortable to be in rooms with them together
Mm-hmm.
because they would mirror for each other and it would trigger them to start looking at their own junk, but they didn't want to look at their own junk, so they'd lash out at everybody else. And it turned into this
Mm-hmm.
weird cycle because they weren't willing to do the work.
I'm sure it was weird too to like see what was happening, know what was happening, and know like there's nothing I can do about this if they're not willing to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
able to see it from outside eyes. And that's a really valid point, because that was one of the things I read, is that twin flames tend to be people who come in and out of your life, but that's a good way to sum it up, where if they stay in your life, it's probably because you have recognized that there's some things that needed to be worked on. And that's kind of like what I was saying earlier. I don't think we would have lasted if we had stayed together the first time and tried to force it. Like, we needed to leave and have other experiences in order to be able to recognize some of the things that not only drew us back together, but what needed to happen in order to stay together. And I mean, honestly, I've seen it too. I've seen a lot of those type of things where, um, you know, you people talk about these relationships that they have that, you know, keep coming back in and keep coming back in. And I'm sure everybody's experienced this, where they have a friend who's like keeps getting with the same person, and that person
Mhm.
keeps pissing them off or doing
Yeah.
things that are not okay.
Yeah.
And from an outside perspective, you're like, yeah, I understand this and I love you, but I think this is like, you need to work on this thing. Like, if you have a little more self love in this area, a little bit more care, you probably wouldn't keep having these same experiences. But it's always easier to see that from the outside, which is
Yeah.
why I think twin flames, even though they're challenging, are important, because
Yes.
sometimes we don't want to see it. Either we don't want to see it or we can't see it from that outside perspective, and this is like shoving it in your face, like,
Yeah.
hey, this is a thing that needs to happen. This isn't all about this person. You are reacting in a way that you need to address.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and so another thing that I was actually reading about that I had thought about before, but I just kind of pushed it out of my brain is that not everybody has a twin flame who's in this incarnation at this very moment.
Mm.
And so all the people who are like, I need to find my twin flame, I want to find my twin flame, stop looking because like
I
that's
feel like
just
they'll
making it
present
harder.
themselves. Yeah, if
Yes,
they're
yes,
around.
yes. And so what happens a lot of the time is from what I was reading and from what I've received in the past is that sometimes we'll have people who pop into our lives later in our lives when we've dealt with our junk. Like all of a sudden they'll pop into our lives and we can reconnect with them. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we're not ready in this incarnation. We need to learn a lot of things. So it could be somebody who's on the other side, who is your twin flame, who is still connecting with you from
Mm-hmm.
the other side, but they're not here physically in this incarnation. And so sometimes people
Excuse
will
me.
have these super deep connections to someone who's passed away or somebody who, one of their guides.
Mm.
And it could very well be that that being, that soul, is your twin flame, and they're not actually in this incarnation. Because the other thing that I've heard a lot of people say over the years is that in your last incarnation on this earth, you will connect back with your twin flame. So if this is your last incarnation, a lot of the time you'll end up in a romantic, loving relationship with your twin flame because both of you have already dealt with all of your stuff and you're coming back together so that your soul can merge back into one.
That's
And
really interesting, actually, because I think I mentioned to you a while ago that there was this psychic that we just kind of randomly stumbled upon who was doing this work for us. And he just at one point looked at Gabe and was like, this is your last time here, right? And Gabe was like, oh, I don't know. He believes in all that, but he's like, I guess. And it did make me think, it made me think really hard about that kind of stuff too. And that would make a lot of sense, I guess, because we have found a loving relationship. But again, there was a lot of work and, work in lives that I just don't even know about, but a lot of work in this life.
yeah, yeah. Well, so I have a lot of really weird stories, and I have a hard time because I will say I'm not 100% sure if my fiance is my twin flame. I'm like 99.9999999% because I've had um other experiences in this lifetime um with other beings that made me question whether or not they were my twin flame.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go back to those things and I'm like, well, maybe not. Well, maybe. And when I met my fiance and when we really started talking, I was like, oh, good Lord, I have never had this intense of a connection with anybody in my entire life. And so I'm like pretty sure that he's my twin flame. But then I start thinking about all the other things I've had happen, and I'm like, okay, super connected soulmates, probably all the other people. But the thing that really makes me question, so in my book, I talk about a lifetime that I had where
Mm.
I was super, super connected to this person. In this lifetime, I started having like memories of that and was super triggered um, and had all kinds of things happen in my life. Well, I made a past life regression deck of cards, and the symbol that's on that card is actually a symbol that my husband in that other lifetime was making for me. He was a blacksmith and he was making this symbol for me. And it's like, I wish I had my deck right in front of me, but I don't. But it's like a heart that's made with like these swirls. You see it in a lot of like iron work and on like metal railings. And I I would draw it quite often, but when I started having those memories, when he handed me this, he was making it into a necklace. When he handed me the symbol, he said, "This is a symbol of unconditional love and protection." And flash forward to I moved into my fiance's house and his daughter had him put up some artwork, like canvas that he had painted for his ex-wife. And the symbols, like the whole painting is this symbol over and over and
Wow.
over again in different colors. And I like looked at it and I was like, well, this is really weird. He made this for his ex-wife like a long time ago, and his daughter's making us put it on the wall, and that's weird to me, but it was super intense for me because I was like, um, that's just too weird that he would have been making that symbol over and over and over
Mm-hmm.
again on this painting, and then to have it all of a sudden come out and be hung on the wall while I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so him and I were talking, and he goes, I've kind of wondered if I am that person from that story in your book.
Yeah.
And
You
so
know
he
what? When you started
recognizes it.
talking about that just the other day, I was like, was that him? Like, I had that same thought. That's crazy.
So it's one of those things that I am a little bit blocked on. Like I have not taken the time to sit and meditate on it and allow myself to receive information on whether or not that is true and accurate. But there are just way too many things, like the intensity of our relationship and the intensity of our connection and how we interact with each other. And then him making that painting with that specific symbol of all the symbols he could have put
Mm-hmm.
on a thing. Like, it's just a little bit too close to home to go, oh, yeah, that. So one of these days I'll sit down and I'll actually like dive back into that lifetime and like truly look at it and see if
That would be
if
interesting. I'm sure
yeah.
not easy, but
Oh,
interesting.
yeah, because it was so intense for me at the time when I was having those memories, and I had to go through like a whole healing process of releasing my husband from that lifetime and like letting go. And so for me to dive back into that, I'm like, yeah, I don't know that I want to do that. That's why I haven't.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well, having read your book, I know it was an extremely intense experience that took a while to process, so I
yes,
can understand.
yes. But there have been other people who have asked me if he is that person, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, not looking at it right now. Because then I have to acknowledge that he's going to call me out on my stuff even more than he already, because he calls me out on my stuff. He is totally the unconditional loving person and the call me out on my crap stuff.
Which in my opinion is a loving relationship. That is
Oh
my
yeah.
opinion. That's
Oh
part of
yeah.
why I am so connected to my husband and have such respect for him because he is so honest. Like, I mean, he's on the spectrum, and I realize in my life that I am attracted to a lot of people on the spectrum because I love honesty.
Yep.
I would rather rip the band-aid off and deal with the pain than
Yep.
slowly die a death of 1,000 cuts. Like, that just does not sound fun to me.
Yeah.
And yeah, is it fun to like deal with the issue head on? No, but again, that's
Ew.
probably my Badger side. Like, I don't know. Like, it's just it scares me more, I guess, to let something fester than to just deal with it.
Yep.
So, but I also like really appreciate like it. Honesty doesn't have to be brutal. Like, we had a conversation the other day about this where you would ask people if they could choose to be like never tell a lie or
Hmm.
always lie, which would they choose? And in my mind, I'm like, why wouldn't you choose always tell the truth?
Hmm.
And you're like, a lot of people don't do that because they're worried about hurting someone's feelings. And I'm like, you can be honest and not hurt people's feelings. Like, you can just not say
Hmm.
something if you know it's too brutal, or you can find a kind way to tell the truth.
Yep.
Like, telling the truth, like, doesn't have to be mean. So when
No.
I say brutal honesty with him, I mean it in like the best possible way.
Yeah.
But also, I'm a grown woman. If I come to you and I'm like, do I look good in this? I want to know the answer, because if I didn't want to know, I wouldn't ask you. Like, if I
Yep.
think I look good and I don't care what you think, I'm not going to ask you. But if I ask you, please tell me the truth because I don't want to have someone be like, oh, well, it's okay. And then have to try to guess whether or not they're telling me the truth.
Yeah.
But that also means because he is such a like very open, honest person and doesn't know how to lie really.
Yeah.
He tries. He's terrible at it. He's just a very honest person. It means that if something needs to be dealt with, I know we are going to be able to talk about that. Also, on the flip side of that equation, when he says something sweet, like it's sincere, right? Like his compliments
Yeah.
are the best because they're not fake, but
Hmm.
also like I would rather, like, I have this thing sometimes where people, they're like, you're so nice. I don't want to say something to upset you. So they won't always tell me 100% like what they feel, especially if it's something that they're challenged with me,
Yeah.
which I appreciate the sentiment, but also like give me an opportunity to work on this with you. Like that
Yep.
hurts my feelings now that you think that I can't handle this. Like
Yeah.
I want someone to be honest with me, please. I'd rather do that than, and I realize I live in the Midwest, which is the zone of passive aggressive.
Yes.
I am not that person though.
No.
And that honesty I think is it's, and maybe in previous iterations of my soul's lives I didn't feel the same way, and I've learned stuff as I went, maybe having this twin flame experience that was part of my lessons, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now I've landed in a spot where that feels really good, and I do think it's interesting how romanticized all of this has become.
Yeah.
Like I get it, twin flame sounds beautiful, right? Like the idea
Yeah.
of being totally wrapped up with someone romantically. But I don't necessarily think that that is what a romantic, like a truly solid romantic relationship is. It's not just the honeymoon period. It's not
Yeah.
just the wedding. It's everything that comes after that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It's work.
yeah. And it
Yeah.
also requires, you know, it requires you to understand yourself. It requires you to learn and grow, but to be able to have an experience with somebody where you both can thrive together based
Mhm.
on this work that you're doing is a really beautiful experience. So it is a beautiful thing in a very deep level, not in this like superficial, like, oh, we're just meant to be together type thing.
Yeah.
It's more than that, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah. Well, and it's meant to be like the most unconditional, loving relationship that you will have.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter what happens, you always come back to this unconditional love. Like you always have this unconditional faith and this unconditional connection with this person. And so when I first met my fiance, we met online through another friend through business stuff. It wasn't a romantic thing. It wasn't online dating. It wasn't any of that stuff. It was we met through a friend through business. And the first time that I met him in person, like I had this super intense knowing like how connected we were. And I was very conflicted with that because my brain wanted to like navigate and try to figure out the whole relational aspect of that because he's somebody that I knew in business. He was somebody that was a friend. Like, so for me to be like, oh my gosh, I have these super intense feelings was really, really intense for me and very emotionally confusing for me at the time. But the first night that we were at a retreat, and the first night we were at this retreat, I had all of these visions. I asked spirit to show me like what all this was about. And the answer that I got so clearly, among a million other things, but the very clear answer that I got is the two of you have always been unconditionally loving to each other. That is what you are meant to be for each other. You're supposed to be unconditional love for each other no matter what. So I'm sitting having conversations with people, and him and I ended up sitting and having a conversation. And I don't know what got into me, but I got very honest. And I was like, I had this vision. I was told that, like, the reason I'm so connected to you is because we're meant to be unconditionally loving to each other in every lifetime.
Hmm.
And he was just like, oh, that's beautiful. And we got into this conversation. And to my I was so grateful that it didn't turn into this super awkward, like, who the heck are you and why are you like hitting on me or whatever? Because that's not what it was. It was like
Oh.
just this honest conversation. And the person that he is so honest. He would have been like, you're being uncomfortable right now if he thought it was uncomfortable. But he was just like, oh, that's beautiful. And we got into this lovely conversation about what that means. And it didn't occur to me at that time that that is a very strong representation of what a twin flame is. Like, you
Mm.
have these beautiful conversations, you have this beautiful connection,
Mm-hmm.
you're in this unconditional loving, unloving space, unconditionally unloved. No, that's not coming. No, that's not right. Don't listen to the words that just came out of my mouth. Unconditionally loving. There we go. That's
Yes.
right, in this space. And regardless of if you're in relationship or if you're just in friendship or if you're in a business partnership with each other, that doesn't change the interaction at a soul and energetic level,
Mm.
because it's the same connection. You're intertwined in that energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a beautiful knowing that no matter what, our friendship was solid. And like, we weren't even exploring a romantic relationship at the time, and we were just friends. But it was a knowing that we were meant to be there to love each other, even if that didn't mean being in a relationship. So
Which I think
it
is a
was a
good
cool
point
thing.
too. Like the
Hmm.
twin flames don't necessarily, like you said, they don't always equal a romantic relationship.
Hmm.
Um, it could be something that you both need to do a lot of things before you're even in a place where you can have the type of deep connecting, you know,
Hmm.
relationship.
Oh boy, did I ever have lots of things to do before that.
And it's still a process, right? Like
Yeah.
you keep on learning and you keep on using the community of people around you that are supposed to be in your life for a very good reason, because
Yeah.
like we've talked about before, it's about experiencing, it's about growing, and that's part of what makes it beautiful. Is if you found your twin flame and you're doing it the right way, you should be able to work through the things you need to work through to allow yourself to be in a much more loving relationship with yourself and with this
Hmm.
other person too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
But it
and I
might
think
be
it's,
work. That's the moral of the story.
oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and I just want to bring up the whole soulmate thing as well, because a lot of people, there are some people who believe that they are the same thing. Which, like I said, twin flame is a soulmate, but a soulmate is not necessarily a twin flame.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's it's a very similar relationship with your soulmates, because your soulmates have the same type of um job in your life, for lack of a better word. They're there
Right.
to help you grow and learn, and they're there with you for every iteration. Like, there's different soulmates that you have that come into your incarnation, um to specifically help you learn
Mm-hmm.
these lessons
Which
or
kind of
have these
goes back
experiences.
to the soul contract thing we were
Mhm.
talking about before.
Yeah,
You've
yeah.
agreed to help each other in different ways.
Yep. And that is so, those relationships can also be super, super strong and super intense. And because your souls have also walked many lifetimes together, they might know you at a level that you don't expect as well. Most people
Mm-hmm.
are like, "Oh, well, my twin flame knows all these things about me when we first meet and we're so connected." Well, your soulmates can do that too. It's just the intensity that's different.
Mm-hmm.
And
The mirroring, I feel like, is the biggest
yes.
difference. Where,
I
like,
was
for
going to say
you,
the level of honesty and mirroring. Yes.
yes, where I'd say, like, for you and I, who I do, believe we're soulmates,
Hmm.
um, it's a very, in this lifetime, I don't know what's been in previous lifetimes, but at least in this one, I know that it's been a very, like, a deep connection, a very positive connection, but we don't necessarily do the things for each other that our partners do when it
Hmm.
comes to mirroring things. Like we play a more supportive role with each other in
Yep.
helping bring each other back to like, hey, I love you, remember who you are, you're
Yep.
awesome, versus, you know, some
Yep.
of the other stuff that we are more challenged with sometimes with our partners, but not
Yep.
in a negative way of like this person is harming me, in a way of like this person's mirroring things, which
Yep.
it's a very different role. So I think the mirroring thing is probably the thing that most people would identify more, which
Yep.
I think across the board, everything I've read about twin flames, that was like a common thread, that they are
Yep.
meant to be mirrors. So
Yep.
regardless, if you see this person and if you understand and connect with yourself enough to understand like this experience is trying to tell me something about myself, maybe you'll start to understand who in your life might be a twin flame. Or,
Yeah.
you know, like you said, they might not be in physical human form right now,
Yep.
but that doesn't mean that you don't have someone trying to connect and help you experience the things you need to experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Something that you just said triggered me to start thinking about that lifetime in that book. And I'm like, oh, okay. I get it. I get it. Okay. So thank you for that, Tammy. There's
Of
some work that
course.
I'm going to do after we get off this call.
Yes. Well, I'm glad I could help, soulmate.
Maybe I can share that at a later date, but this might be an intense day for me to meditate. Um but no, I think this is a beautiful topic for people to
Mm-hmm.
think about and think about the relationships that they have around them and those people who are actively seeking out their soulmate or their twin flame. I would just urge you to like calm yourself, slow
Mm-hmm.
your roll a little bit, and
That's
just
also
look
lurking
at your own stuff.
externally. Exactly. Like,
Yes.
it's kind of like everyone says, well, the relationships happen when you stop looking. I mean, it's an old trope, but the reality
Yeah.
is if you are desperately seeking this connection with someone, this is a good time to make that connection with yourself. And then
Yep.
some of these other people might present themselves, you
Yeah.
know, or you might
Yeah.
at least understand if someone has presented themselves already or recognize when it comes into your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you brought up how you don't stay in contact with your previous relationships a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the time. And it's kind of funny because I still talk to my ex-husband on a regular basis. Um, and we are good friends and we consistently talk. And I'm very aware that my ex is one of my soulmates and that we do have a lot of things in common. But I've always been aware that our connection was not a twin flame connection, but our
Mm-hmm.
connection was a soulmate connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have multiple lifetimes with my ex as well that I remember quite clearly. But um the one thing about staying in connection with those relationships, a lot of the time for me, when I am staying in connection, because usually I don't stay in touch with my exes either. I want nothing to do with that. Um I have no qualms about saying I don't want to talk to my exes. Um if you're listening, good for you. Um, but my my ex-husband, we do talk because we do have a strong soulmate connection
Mm-hmm.
where we know that we've traveled in these lifetimes together and we know what our role is in helping each other look at our stuff. And it is very different when I look at those two different relationships
Mm-hmm.
because they have both been um deep connection relationships, but I know the differences.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I can look at those two things and see um, the difference in energetic connection and soul connection. Um, and I think one of the most important things for me has always been not seeking out um, the the answer to what that connection is. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
just want to experience the connection. And when I started trying to seek out, like, oh, is this, is this, is this, it really hindered my growth because I was
Mm,
more seeking this label rather than
yeah,
experiencing what was going on. And I think that's part of the reason why I haven't dove back into that lifetime, is because I didn't want to um, create a different experience for myself in seeking rather than experiencing, if
that
that
makes a
makes
lot
any
of
sense.
sense. It does make sense. I mean, when you just think about like if you're so busy worrying about whether or not this is a thing with
Mhm.
a label, you might not be allowing yourself to actually be in the experience. You're in your head
Yeah.
instead of in your body experiencing what's happening at the moment. That's a good point.
Yeah. And I think now at this point, I've been with my fiance long enough that I've had a lot of experience that I can look at that and see if that is an accurate label or an accurate term to use. Not that I want to label everything,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's a good thing to look at after I've had experience.
Sure. I
So,
mean, and it's an
so
interesting thing to think about and to talk about. Obviously, people are interested in hearing about this and kind of what the perspective is that we have or other people have. I mean, if you just look up, any reputable sources on Google about twin flames, you'll be able to read all the same type of stuff that we've been reading about all of this.
yeah,
I just think that settling in, well, settling into the knowing piece of the gifts that we have, sometimes there's things that you don't necessarily need an explanation, you just know. So
yeah,
that's kind of how I felt with with Gabe. Is I already had a really strong feeling about what our relationship meant before I even knew anything about twin flames, and then
yeah.
I stumbled upon it one day, and as I was reading I was like, so I asked him, I read the information I was reading, I was like, do you think that we're twin flames? He's like, I don't know, it sounds a lot like we could be.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
as I settled into it more, I was like, I'm positive it's got to be something like that. But also, I don't care whether or not it is that or not, because I am having an experience with him that is really important, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I sincerely hope as we wrap up this conversation today, I sincerely hope that people again understand the meaning that we have behind this. This is not like a look so hard for your twin flame that you land in an abusive relationship and you stay there. That's not at all what this conversation is about. It's about personal growth. Like twin flames are supposed to be there for your personal growth. And while it might be romantic sometimes it's not. But if you sit and you do that internal work, I think you have a much larger chance of being able to recognize it when it happens.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I would love to hear people's stories about their twin flames or
Mm,
about their soulmate connections even,
mm-hmm.
and how that's affected their lives. Because I know that my connections with people and my experiences with people have made a huge difference and a huge impact on how I've moved forward and how I have actually looked at the things that I needed to look at because somebody
Yes.
called me on my junk.
Yes.
Um,
Me too.
I would love to hear their stories.
Yeah, me too.
So please
I
share.
love the interaction that we're starting to get more of from our listeners. Thank you so much. I get such positive feedback.
Yeah.
And even if you think we're doing something wrong, I just like the feedback in general because
Yeah.
it's nice to interact with people and know that they're listening and they also have things that, it brought up for them. So
Yeah.
please
Yeah.
do let us know. And if there's any other things you want us to talk about, I know we say that all the time, but obviously we do listen. So
Yeah.
please let us know if there's something you want us to talk about, and we will look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Yeah. See you later, woo mates. Thanks everybody for listening. If you liked what you heard today, please subscribe and check the show description for the links to the show. We would love to hear your thoughts below on this episode, as well as anything that you'd like us to talk about on future episodes. Remember, everybody, you are unique just the way you are, and that is why they call us Woo.
Mm-hmm.